Welcome back to Novel Writing 101, the 21-week course where I teach you how to write the first draft of your novel. Now today is week 19 and we're going to talk about endings. Let's get into it. So like I said, it's week 19 of the course and week 15 of section B, writing and execution. This is our second to last active week of the course where we're getting into writing and advice. You should be really close to finishing your first draft, and that's why today we're going to talk about endings. Now, endings can be really difficult to not only write, but get right. We're going to break down our talk on endings into 3 different parts: impact, message, and loose ends. Kicking it off with impact. Again, we want our story to wrap up and feel impactful at the ending. This means giving the readers a little bit of what they expect, but not in a sense that it feels flat. No matter what genre you're writing, it's very typical to leave clues along the way for your reader so they can go back and piece together why something happened. It's like Chekhov's gun, which essentially is the thing of if you show a gun in the first act, in the third act, that gun's going to be used for something. So you want to give your reader something in the ending that feels like a little aha moment of, oh, this is why this person said this 6 chapters ago, or, oh, this is tying into something that happened in the opening scene. You want to give them a sense of joy and fulfillment of why everything is happening the way it is, even if it totally shocks them. And this is why impact is so important for endings, because you want the reader to feel like something significant just happened, but not something that's so out of the ordinary and so wild that it's not reasonable. And this is where we're going to talk about Deus Ex Machina really quickly. Essentially, this is where in stories, something happens to wrap up the ending really nicely in a way that kind of brushes all the problems aside in a way that feels fake and godlike. It's essentially like God is reaching his hand down and just fixing things for you. It's not believable, it's not impactful to the plot because everything just gets wrapped up in a nice little bow without any rhyme or reason. I'm sure you can think of movies or books where this has happened and you're kind of just left at the end being like, why did that happen? That wasn't fulfilling at all. Why couldn't this been wrapped up in a way that made sense with the character and the story? So that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid having your reader feel very disconnected from the ending and like everything just happened in a way that made the writer's job easier and not bettered the storyline. Because think of it this way. Let's use an example of our main character's being chased by the cops and they get to a dead end, okay? And the reader is probably expecting like this epic fight scene or this way of like them very cunningly getting out of this situation. But if all of a sudden you say, oh, and the back of the alley blew up and all the stones went everywhere and there was an opening in the wall and they could drive through and they escaped. Unless this was all part of like an elaborate heist that made sense and maybe like this B character that went off on their own finally circled back and like joined forces with the main character again, and that would make sense. But if it's just like this random wild coincidence, this hand of God that comes in and solves everything, it doesn't feel fulfilling for the reader. So that's why I want you to think about impact. How is your ending impacting your reader and your story? Is it meeting reader expectations? Is it fulfilling on a promise you've made to them? Or is it kind of just wrapping everything up nicely in a bow and just pushing it to the side? Next, let's talk about message. Now, depending on what you're writing or what your writing style is, this could be really deep or very surface level. Essentially, what I want you to ask yourself is, by ending the story this way, what are you telling your reader about themselves, about the world, or about the situation? Because despite what you may think, regardless of what genre you're writing, or if it's a comedy, or if it's something very lighthearted and silly, there is a message you are telling the reader, either consciously or subconsciously. For instance, if you're writing a romantic comedy and you get to the ending and the characters come together, you're sending a message probably about true love, triumphs all, or that everything works out in the end, or that you just have to put a little trust in the universe for things to work out. If you're writing an epic sci-fi and in the ending it's kind of like a good guys lose situation, what are you telling the reader? Are you saying that sometimes evil wins? Are you saying that sometimes it's not about winning, it's about your integrity and the community you've built along the way? Ask yourselves these questions when it comes to your ending. What are you telling the reader? What is your perspective you're giving on this situation? This also ties back to impact, because whatever message you're portraying with this ending, it's going to leave the reader either feeling fulfilled, confused, maybe they're asking questions they've never asked themselves before. It's going to have an impact and have them sitting there thinking, hopefully, about things in a new light. It could even reaffirm their own worldview. Whatever it is, make sure you sit down and think about what this message could be and how you're telling it and if it's coming across the way you want it to. I'm going to give one more example really quickly. I recently finished writing the first draft of my novella project Arcadia. And this novella turned into a 3-book series that kind of just like ran away from me in the best way. But at the end of the first book, not all is a triumph. Our main character has put a lot of effort and a lot of cunning into her plan, and essentially it falls out right underneath her, and she appears unsuccessful. However, our main character's grit and integrity that's gotten her through this novel has shown the reader that she doesn't give up, and whatever's thrown at her, she's going to overcome it one way or another. So the message, even with the ending not turning out how the main character wants, is that whatever happens, she's going to keep going, and there's a goal she wants to attain that she's not going to give up on. So it leaves the reader with this message of, things are hard and shit doesn't go your way all the time, but you can't give up. So again, think about what message you want to convey and how you're conveying it. The last thing we're going to talk about is loose ends. Now, if you're writing a series, there's a lot more flexibility here of wrapping these loose ends up over your subsequent books because there's a greater storyline here. But if you're writing a standalone, which is one book, you're going to have to start thinking about these loose ends now. And this can be things like, what happens to side character B that we left off in the distance? What happens to this threat that we thought was going to come up in the climax but didn't? This could even be things as simple as, when we had this great battle, we left the dog over here, what happened to the dog? These are questions the reader might have at the end of the book that they're going to ruminate on and worry about and just feel unfulfilled if these questions aren't answered. Sometimes you can leave these loose ends unanswered if you just want the reader to think about it or just deny them the gratification of knowing what happens. This is common in thrillers or horror where the ending's left a little ambiguous and the reader has to sit with their thoughts and their icky emotions about what happened, or maybe there's some chilling thing of like, is evil really dead? In those instances, it can work to not wrap up these loose ends in a nice way. But other genres, like romance for instance, the reader expects these loose ends to get wrapped up. Did they get their happily ever after? So as you're working through the end of your first draft, I want you to start thinking about what loose ends you may be giving the reader. What happened to this character? What happened to the job they almost lost? What happened to the dog? Again, you can answer some things, leave some things ambiguous, just decide what you want to do with all these loose ends. And I want you to think about it in a meaningful way. Don't just wrap up a loose end because you think you need to. Ask yourself, what does this do to the reader if I answer this question? What does it do to the reader if I leave it ambiguous? Sometimes the endings that grip us the most in stories are the ones that are left unanswered because it has us thinking about the world or what we wish would have happened. One of my all-time favorite movies is Whiplash. If you haven't seen that movie, as a creative, I cannot recommend it enough. This is what happens, so if you haven't seen it and you don't want spoilers, don't watch this part. Essentially, the movie follows a young man who is going to music school. He is a drummer. He wants nothing more than to be the best of the best. Throughout the movie, he goes through lots of ups and downs. His instructor abuses him, bullies him. He loses his relationship. He throws all of his efforts and focus into drumming and neglects his social life. And then everything crashes and burns. He gives up on drumming, and then he's essentially just going through a normal life, a shell of himself. Then he comes back to drumming at the end. He goes to this big concert, he gives a big FU to his teacher, and he does like one of the most amazing drum solos he's ever done. And then the movie ends. As the viewer, we are left without a conclusive message of whether this was a good thing or a bad thing that happened to him. Is the moral of the story, it's worth giving up your life for to be successful? Or is the moral of the story, nothing is worth sacrificing everything for success? That's what I love about this ending because it leaves the viewer to take their own personal message from it. I've talked to people with the mindset of, this is a story about how success can kill you. Whereas me personally, I'm in the mindset of, if this is your passion, you can sacrifice everything for it and it's worth it. So it's this polarizing ending of like people having these two drastically different worldviews from the same ending that's just left kind of vague. And that's why endings can be so important. They leave the reader or the viewer to think and form their own opinions, have very deep emotions connected to this ending, whether good or bad, and it sticks with you. A good ending always sticks with you. So that's what I want you to think about when you're working on the final stages of your first draft. How are you going to deliver your ending, and what does it mean to the reader? What is its impact? What is its message? And what loose ends are you going to tie up? Again, endings are hard to write, but remember, this is just your first draft. You can refine everything later. So if you have a crazy idea for the ending, run with it. What's the harm? You can always scrap it later if it doesn't work out. But push yourself to think of something great and something impactful. That's it for me this week. I hope this was helpful. Like I said, next week is our last week of these advice chats and working on our first draft. We're going to talk about final pages and finishing strong, so get ready for that. As always, your homework is just to keep writing and keep pushing through the first draft process to get to the end. If you're struggling to get through these last couple weeks, please reach out. In the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next week.